Yes, here I am. It's Tom Padula from TomPadulaTV and Insegna Booksellers. I'm in another place in Cardella in Victoria near Carambarra, and I am giving my 17th presentation on China, on world history, and this time it's on China as well. The third one on China because such an important place. Before I go on any further, I've just read that Sebastiano Liotta passed away, and I give my condolences to James and family. Personality in the Italian community in Melbourne and worth remembering. Some of his videos, etc., will, of course, be good memory of the work that he did. Now, this morning I'm actually, China is a very attractive study, and speaking to my daughter, she said something quite absurd. Oh, you can spend a whole lifetime studying China, and that is so true. But because I'm doing world history, and I said I would skim over all cultures and all nations, because really we are one humanity. If we don't forget that and we try to bring more harmony amidst the nations of the world, then the conflicts of the past will continue. And it's a real, it would be a real pity not to try, because progress over centuries has been made to such a great extent. Then this morning too, I have, it's Australia Day celebration week. We're in the middle of it now, just starting. And on the 26th is Australia Day, 25th and 26th, because the 25th we dedicate to the indigenous populations of Australia, in the sense that on that day, there was, up to that time, there was no settlement by outsiders into Australia. There had been a number of excursions from various nations, including China, including Holland, including France. They're close by. It was a time when navigators around the world went out, and since Christopher Columbus' journey to the Americas, and the Europeans called it the discovery of America. Well, no one discovered anything at all, because the world had been populated from centuries before. So, in other words, it's always true that we discover something, but we discover something for ourselves. The reality is that if we look at the people already there, then you're not discovering them; they've been there for a long time. So this business of invasion, etc., has to be understood in context, because we invade other countries when we go there as tourists and remain. So that's why the world is one, and we as a humanity should be one and respect the environment in which we have. So we have to do everything possible to protect what we have. Let's not forget that at the beginning of the 20th century, there were just over 2 billion people in the world. We are now 8 billion. And even then, people did suffer from famines and wars, etc. But in the last 120 years, my God, the progress, the changes have been astronomical. And I suspect that the 21st century will be even more so, with us going to other planets. It's coming. It's inevitable. And China will be at the forefront of all the nations of the world, including, of course, the people who've been there before, United States, Russia, the European people too. India will come along, and Brazil. As the organisation of the world becomes more united, there'll be more. There should be more mixing of talents from all over the world, from our humanity. Give opportunities to those who can. Now, so that's China. It's 11:31. I've gone too much. I will speak about Australia, of course, because it's Australia Day, and I will do some songs. See how we go. Now, let's start on China. The last couple of weeks, I've looked at China from a perspective, just for me to just get into it. But now I've discovered that there are so many other textbooks, and I'm going to read you from one of these, the actual structure of China, because last week we said the geography of China is very important. So the land of China is about 3,000 kilometres across and bordered by the Gobi Desert in the north, the mountains of Tibet in the west, and the China Sea to the east and south. So Chinese civilization, Western countries, Chinese civilization developed there undisturbed and unaffected by Western countries. Well, all other countries. Whoever wanted to get there would find it very difficult to enter. Because these natural boundaries kept the Chinese isolated from other cultures. And we got to bring in here the dynasties of China. And the first one was the Xia, H-S-I-A, the Xia dynasty. And they sort of began to form the Chinese various groups that had been there for a while into one state and try to impose one state rule. So China, in fact, has been the longest civilization of old in the world, because let's look at, say, Sumer and the Indus Valley and also Egypt. Those old civilizations came to an end. They didn't continue. In China, they've actually had the dynasties going from one dynasty to another, to another, to another. And a dynasty was the rule of one person from one family. And the person who took over was usually the first son of the emperor. So it's same idea as with Egypt, but it's lasted till 1912, when there was a revolution and there was a problem. There was the end of the emperor, the last emperor, in 1911. So, but now the modern history of China, we can't look at it in the sense that we say, oh, it's the last dynasty, because the people, when there's trouble, there were always periods of realignment, if you like, within China itself, and therefore the next lot of the next people who then became the dynasty and ruled for sometimes up to 30 generations, 30, 40, 50 generations. And I'll go through the dynasties today to just give an idea. But as I said, the study of China can be done by you with great interest. There are a lot of textbooks and they're very good. We've got very good chapters by very knowledgeable people. I'm not one of them. I'm doing this for my own personal journey, and I hope that you take it on yourself. Now, welcome to Curtis L. Tolman, Carmela Parisi Eduardo, Jessica B. Fantastic. Thank you for coming on. And I'm here in Cardella, near Caramburra, in a farm. I'm looking over. It's a fantastic area. And I might just, before I finish, give you a little look outside. to appreciate where I am, because Victoria is just beautiful wherever you go. It's fantastic. Now, let's go back. Welcome to Pietro di Dio as well. That's from Montemurro. Well done. Now, the remains of old Stone Age people, estimated at 500,000 years old, have been found in China. Well, I was 500, that's 500,000 years ago. So the remains, there's no carbon dating, just bones, whatever, you know. At first, these people were hunters, like everywhere else in the world. Then about 4,000 years ago, they became farmers and built villages along the Huanghe River and the fertile valleys around the Chengjiang River. Now, the Huanghe River is called the Yellow River. We used to know it as the Yellow River. And the Chengjiang River was called the Yangtze River. So the new names are coming up. Like what we're doing in Australia now with our indigenous populations, we're giving names and recognition to the people who have lived here, the first generation people. First generation, the first people of Australia, because, you know, we're all first generations in a way. Okay. Now, these people grew crops of rice, wheat and millet and kept herds of sheep, goats, cattle and pigs. So that's how the civilizations work. You form the Neolithic village. About 2000 BC, before the birth of Christ, a race of people invaded China from the west, and their leader, Emperor Huangdi, made himself emperor. He then passed his power on to his family when he died, thus setting up an exclusive form of power called a dynasty, and dynasties of emperors ruled China until 1912. Now, we don't call them emperors, but they act like, you know, the current leader of China acts like an emperor and disregarded in China as an emperor. But there have been some movements amongst the people in terms of democracy. But, you know, even democracy taken to extreme can become like a dynasty in certain families. Just look at America, you know, some of the families there, the Bush, the Clintons, you know, the Kennedys, they are that sort of, and, you know, you've got the France, to Italy, it's the same sort of thing. Except that in China, it has remained, that mentality has remained there, but even in Russia, in Putin, same thing. So we have to look at the culture of the people in order to accept the fact that their progress cannot be like in places where there are votes, where you go to the polls and in a democratic fashion. So, you know, how do we interpret all that? You need a bit of wisdom here. You need a bit of Confucianism, you know, the balance. Because Confucius was regarded very highly in China up to 1911, when, you know, remember him like a saint, like, you know, in the Christian churches. Remember some saints. His worship from the state stopped. But this recognition and his influence is still very strong today, even though he was born 500 plus years before the birth of Christ. So his disciples have kept his name up, and his philosophy, because it's not regarded as a religion, has remained such in China. And, you know, you've got, it's sort of Confucius has got some of those elements where you have to, what I talk about, you know, one humanity. Everyone needs to be looked after properly. Because we are born, then we grow up as adults, and then we get old. So in the early part of our life and in the later part of our life, we can't do all the things that we, you know, that you do in the middle of it, when you are very strong and you feel as if the world is yours. It's, you know, it's, Confucius would say, well, you've got to look after the old because they looked after you before, and you've got to look after the young because they're going to be looking after you after. So there we are. So let's have a look. Huang Di established the Xia dynasty. Historians know very little of this dynasty. They have learned a lot about ancient China from the next dynasty, the Shang dynasty. Straight after the Xia dynasty, the Shang, that lasted from 1500 to 1100 before Christ. So the Shang dynasty lasted for 400 years. It's a long time. And great progress came with the Shang dynasty as bronze was invented, the first writing appeared, and one capital city called Anyang was set up to rule over all the people that lived on the plains between the Huanghe River and the Changjiang River, in other words, the Yellow River, and the Yangtze River. Now, if we look at China, we say, why did they do what they did? How come they did it? So let's have a look at what the Shang did. The Shang people were divided into two classes, only two classes. The richer, powerful nobles and warriors, so the armies were on their side, and the poorer peasants. The peasants grew the food that fed the people, and there were always problems of famine, food shortages, limited amounts of farming land, and many, many people to feed. In other words, food is a political tool as well. In today's world, for example, we produce more food now to feed all of 8 billion people. We can feed them all. The only reason why some people go hungry today is because the food is not shared properly right across 100%. Because if you do, then there's no famine. But if you notice, with the tsunami in Tonga now, the Australian government is doing quite a lot. New Zealand, the people close to you. So the nations around you are important allies. They're not enemies, allies. We need so make sure that people are fed and live in appropriate housing, etc. So peasants used sickle, mattock, and hammer, and the ox-drawn plough was only invented in the Zhou dynasty, 1000 to 21 BC. So after the Shang dynasty came the Zhou dynasty, Z-H-O-U, and they lasted for 800 years, 750 years plus. Nobles and warriors owned the land and administered it for the emperor. So all of China belonged to the emperor. And so he said, you can have this, you can have that, a bit like in France under the king, the Sun King. The nobles were told, you've got to give me this much, and then they had to then apply this, use their military locally in order to force the peasants to pay the taxes. And of course, when they wanted to do something extra, who suffered were the people down the bottom, a bit like today. But today we have social security, and that's come about because of people like Rousseau in France, Confucius in China. So, we're talking about people almost 3,000 years apart. And then the French Revolution came, and Europe became more and more sort of, becoming aware of the need to look after older people. So it's called right, left, centre, in politics, but really, honestly, these are just names. The reality is that you can have a bad government on all sides, and you can have a good government on all sides, depending on whether they look after the people or not. So, when people play games at the top and they become greedy or they can't manage their people, that's when trouble really starts. So, let's go back. Nobles and warriors owned the land and administered it for the emperor. They dwelt in splendid homes and even palaces. The women powdered and made up their faces with natural products such as pollen dust. They wore silk clothes, jade and gold jewellery, and tidied up their hair with elaborate metal combs. Very civilised. Very. The rich ones always do very well for themselves. Early Chinese writing on bones and tortoise shell appears as early as 1500 BC. The bones or shells were heated until they cracked. These cracks were interpreted as messages from the gods. Early Chinese writing, it seemed, had a magical quality for the Chinese, as it was used to predict the future, answer questions, or provide information about the weather. Interesting. Early Chinese writing was picture writing. Later, these pictures were simplified to become combinations of lines and shapes called characters. By 2002 BC, pretty good with, say 2002 BC, before Christ. So these people who've written this particular textbook must have researched it, otherwise it's fake news. But it's, about that time. The Chinese had developed 2,000 characters. So if you've got a piece, written on paper, if the paper's been kept, then you count the 2,000 characters. There are about 10,000 characters, so it becomes, languages evolve. It doesn't matter which type of alphabet you use, which character you use, they evolve. It's simple as that. The Chinese had developed 2,000 characters. By 2000 BC, the Chinese had developed characters. And by the end of the Han period, about another 6,000 had been developed system of writing had been set up. Now I'll just go through the dynasties soon. I'll look through them now. But let's finish this one here. Bamboo sheets and silk strips replaced bones and tortoise shells as the material upon which writing appeared. Paper from bark replaced bamboo and silk. By the end of the Tang period, printing using wood blocks had been invented. Clearly, the development of printing by the Chinese was done well before civilization in the West, when AD by Gutenberg in Germany in 1456. So printing was already happening in China. It's 1,500, even more, years before Gutenberg had the printing machine. But in the West, in Europe, writing, the monks kept it up. They wrote by hand. Beautiful books. Some of them still, people can see them. So, all people in the world develop different things, and then because of trade, they're sort of shared from one to the other. Let me see, I've got the dynasties here. I just want to go through the dynasties and tell you. So there was the Shang dynasty first, then the Zhou dynasty, then we find the Han dynasty, then the Tang dynasty, then the Song dynasty, then the Yuan dynasty, Ming dynasty, and the Qing dynasty, K-I-N-G. And that was where the last emperor, they made the film of it. And the Qing dynasty gave the name to China. It's a bit like that. And there's a book here, The Dynasties of China. Yeah, that's the sort of thing that I look at. And, there's a lot of information there. I mean, China now is going to explode in terms of the information we have about China. Because you cannot stop 1.4 billion people from progressing. Not after the progress they've made in the last 40 years. It's amazing. And before that, we've got a nation that had problems with, under Mao Zedong, that had problems with feeding itself, to one that is become a world power. So up to, say, 200 years ago, when they had problems there with the Europeans going there, the British, getting to Hong Kong, and, it was the Europeans colonising powers that had a great effect in China. In India, the British were there for 300 years. Incredible. How then the Dutch in Indonesia, again the English in Australia, New Zealand. You've got who else? The French in Polynesia. And that's why, you know, our Prime Minister should have, in a way, had more regard for the French, because they've been here since, you know, the British settled in Australia. In fact, 2 or 3 months later, after Captain Arthur Phillip was here, 2 or 3 years, a few months, I think it was a few months later, the French arrived with a ship. But then they had problems with the French Revolution, Napoleon, the wars there, so they couldn't. The same thing happened in North America, the French and Canada, Quebec. So these are nations here, and the Spaniards in South America. You know, we have incredible, you know, colonies. They say, oh, you know, you sort of regard as a bad times. Well, yes, they were, but without them, the trade and the exchange between humanity would never happened. So it's our duty now, really. It's that we need to look forward to a peaceful world and manage it well. It's all in the administration of it. Now, that was one. Now, I've only got, well, I still got a bit of time here. I just wanted to read you something else. Let me see. Why was China settled? This one says. China is considered to be the oldest living civilization, having begun about 3000 BC. That's this other textbook. Other civilizations began earlier than China, for example, Sumer, but they died out. Like other ancient civilizations, the first inhabitants of China were nomadic hunters who gathered food as they moved from place to place. Eventually, they learned, like most Stone Age people, throughout the world. So as the Stone Age people, after the Ice Age, that all the movements in the world occurred. And then before the Earth became divided up into continents, because there were connections between, let's say, Asia, you know, where Indonesia is in, Australia, North America and Europe, right across the board. Africa, the people could travel all around. So, like most Stone Age people throughout the world, to plant crops and to domesticate animals. From this development, they settled it down in permanent dwellings, and in time they had built cities and created governments. There you are, from the village to a state, well, run by a government, and then, of course, the ambitious one to actually become power, you know, the empire idea. The question we must ask is why China was settled. Well, so why was it? Okay, let's have a look. Like Egypt and Sumer, the answer can be found in the soil of the river valleys. Chinese civilization first began in the valley of the Huang River, sometimes called the Yellow River. In northern China, and you can have a look at it on a map, the river gets its name because of the colour of the soil stains the water yellow. This special soil is called loess, L-O-E-S-S. The soil is deep, stoneless, and is very rich. Early people, therefore, found it excellent for farming. The river also helped develop civilization because people needed to be organised into groups in order to channel water by canals to their fields and stop the river from flooding. So, none of these tasks could be done by individuals. The population grew to an extent where the people began to spread out to other rivers in the south, such as the Jiang River. Old books may call it the Yangtze River. Now, by the way, the dynasties, there's something here. Got another 5 minutes, and I'm going to use that. Welcome to Maria Fail and Maria Oceanjarami. Thank you for coming on. The dynasties of China. Chinese history can best be observed through the rise and fall of the dynasties or ruling families of China. Each dynasty ruled China for a certain period until overtaken by another. The Xia dynasty. This period shows the first evidence of Chinese culture. During this time, animals were domesticated and the pottery wheel was invented. You know, China, we call the potters. So it's old China. The Shang dynasty, 1500 to 1027 BC. The dynasty began near the Huang Valley and is regarded as the first real attempt to establish central control in China. 30 Shang rulers governed during this dynasty, with the position of emperor being automatically passed on to the next male heir. There appears to have been no outstanding individual recorded during this reign. So these people just did their job. They put their head down and said, we've got to rule, and they ruled properly. There's no one, people followed the rules. The Shang wrote signs on wood, bamboo and tortoise shells. Many of these early signs were just pictures, pictograms we called them, that were simple and therefore easy to read or recognize. There were thousands of such pictures, and eventually writing developed. This form of writing was understood all over China. It is also the basis of the modern day Chinese writing. Well, there's a chart here, I can't show you that. Other skills developed by the Shang included working with bronze, tin and copper melted together, to make weapons, ornaments and tools, the development of high-quality kilns for pottery, and their expertise in the production and use of silk. Members of the ruling classes were warriors, and evidence suggests that the Shang princes conquered many other city-states. So it reminds me of Italy a lot. The last of the Shang emperors, Chu Xin, did have some claim to fame, especially in the way he died. Now listen to this. Legend has it that he was defeated in battle by the leader of the next dynasty, King Wu. Wu went on to Chu Xin's palace, where the emperor had tried to burn himself to death. Good one for a film here. Wu stabbed Chu, cut off his head and hung it from his banner. Wow. Cruelty reigned supreme. Now, the Chu had fought against the Shang for many years, and in 1027 BC, they finally defeated them. The Chu used the mandate of heaven to help them remove the Shang emperor. Chinese emperors believed that they ruled because the gods had made them emperors, and as such they were the sons of heaven. A bit like the pharaohs in Egypt. And could not be disobeyed. This they called the mandate from heaven. This belief is interesting because it was adopted by European kings over 1,500 years later. They called it the divine right of king. And this where Marco Polo maybe would have something, it would have influenced the Europeans a little bit. That was about 1200. Unlike later European kings, the Chinese people could remove the mandate if they believed that the emperor was not performing well. He could remove them. The Chu leader led the people to believe that the last Shang emperor ruled poorly, so they replaced him with a Chu emperor. Now, this is where Confucius comes in. Confucius' philosophy had an effect on the Chu leaders. Few of the Chu emperors were strong rulers, and this led to the nation breaking up into smaller independent states. The rulers of these states were supposed to pay homage to the emperor, that is, to provide him with soldiers, money and labour. This is called a feudal system, and again was adopted over 1,000 years later by Europeans during the Middle Ages. We've heard of the feudal system. During the political weakness of the dynasty, there were many important advances made in other fields. During the reign of the Chu, the Chinese introduced a money economy, developed fertilizer, used irrigation, and began to use iron, strong arms. The most important personality of the day was Confucius, a teacher and philosopher whose main belief was that people should be good to each other, including children to parents, rulers to people, and the living to their ancestors. A connection with the afterlife. And, I'm doing Dante Alighieri on Sundays. And Dante, again, looks at looks at hell, purgatory, paradise. Did he get his ideas from Marco Polo? And Marco Polo lived before Dante. So there was quite a bit and the Crusades brought a lot of information back. And the same thing happened in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. So the Chu dynasty ended when the emperor was no longer regarded with any respect and the nation had been divided into many warring states, which had become strong enough to ignore the emperor. Life for most Chinese people was not free or democratic. An emperor was head of the kingdom and his power was thought to come directly from heaven. Under him came the mandarins, who were important government officials and scholars, then scribes and military officers. The surrounding countryside was made up of semi-independent states. Most of these states were given to members of the royal family and to the families of important officials. In return for these states, the people paid tributes to the emperor, for example, grain, horses, and in times of trouble, soldiers. These states' owners divided up their land and granted it to the warlords, like military leaders, who in turn rented it to peasant farmers. The farmers paid their rent in produce as well as helping to build roads, bridges, forts and giving service in the army. Now, I went to England about 15 years ago and a taxi driver said, "Oh, this belongs to the Count." I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, because in England you don't buy a house, you can't own the land on which the house is built. You buy it for 100 years. And then the state can get it back." So some of this stuff here, has implications with the way we understand the world. So going into history is important. I have to finish now, but I will read you this poem. The following poem, also from the book of poetry, describes a good government officer called Chung Shan Fu. Striving only for dignity and good deportment, he neither oppresses the solitary man nor the widow, nor does he fear the powerful and the oppressive. He is tireless in fulfilling his duties, clear-sighted and wise. In his nature, Chung Shan Fu is a pattern of mildness and blessedness. Good has every attitude and air, so cautious, so composed, following none but the ancient teachings, striving only for dignity and good deportment. Obedient to the Son of Heaven, whose glorious commandments he spreads abroad. And I'm going to finish that for today. That's it for today's China. Quite an interesting part, isn't it, really? I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to make, I don't know, next week what I'm going to do, but I'm touring between Russia and South, but I think I'll go to South America. We can't ignore South America and Africa, and then we'll come back. Because then I have to go to, of course, to Crete and Greece and Rome. But I'll just keep going. So if you follow me on history and you actually, pick up some of these books, you'll be richer for it yourself. Enjoy the journey. I'm going to do it. Now, the next one is invasion, before the invasion. This is Australia Day Celebration Week. I've called it for many years. Now, the one that I'm going to read today is food in the desert. Okay? In arid areas, water was vital, not only because people themselves needed to drink it, but food, plants and animals also had to have water. Rainfall meant life or death for the desert people and all other forms of life. Aborigines or indigenous people had to know where to find edible plants and where creatures such as kangaroos and emus fed and drank. Camps had to be moved when water began to run low and plant and animal foods began to get scarce. Much of the rain in the desert falls over quite small areas, so the people might move to a place in the distance where they had seen rain falling. Here plants would quickly grow and animals would arrive. Now, this book here was written in the 1980s. In the 1950s, this Professor Meggitt lived with the Walbiri or Walpiri people of the Central Desert. And he learned a lot about how food was found by the desert people in Australia. He might have expected the Aborigines to have trouble finding enough food, but he found that this was not so. So the people got used to the environment. From what they told him, he was able to list this source of food, so some of the source of food in the desert. 35 kinds of trees, shrubs, grasses that gave them food. The Walpiri or Walbiri ate the leaves, the fruit and the roots. 35 types. 6 kinds of trees and shrubs that harboured edible grubs or honey producing bees. 3 plants that were used for medicinal purposes. 31 plants, mostly trees, that were used in making wooden tools and other useful articles. 8 plants were used in making decorations to be worn in ceremonies. When it came to birds, animals, insects and reptiles, Maggott's list has more than 100 edible species, and 13 which were valued because their feathers or fur were used for ceremonial decorations. Of course, not all of these species of plants or animals were available all the year round. In years of reasonable rainfall, there would be a regular seasonal movement from place to place according to which plants were plentiful at a certain place at a certain time of the year. When there was unusually heavy rain, so that water was standing in pools everywhere, the Walbiri or Walpiri people took the chance to visit areas where certain favourite plants grew, too far from normal water sources for regular visits. In the driest time of the year before the summer rains, the Walbiri or Walpiri people split into the smallest possible groups: a man, his wife or wives and children, perhaps a young unmarried man. They might also include 1 or 2 old people who were cared for by the active younger men and women. At these times, the careful training of the young people showed its worth, for all the adults in the group were able to make their contribution. The old people might not be able to do much hunting or gathering, but they would have even greater knowledge of the country and its resources. So you've got to respect the old, because they know quite a lot more. They lived before you. But the environment changes around them, but not in a Neolithic state, in a Neolithic village. You know, they're Paleolithic, really, nomads, and they form themselves into it's a pre-Neolithic almost. The men caught plenty. In the desert, game was scarce. Often it was. No, wait a minute. No, I've gone a bit further out. No, I'm going to finish this paragraph, and then that'll be the next one, because I had a drink. So they had great knowledge and resource. Most of the rain falls in the summer months, and it was during that time that the Walbiri used to gather in the greatest numbers for the important annual ceremonies, including initiation. The scattered groups would come together again because food was plentiful and there was enough water for many people for a few weeks. So they took advantage of the good times. For what? Then people could enjoy seeing each other again, and important business could be done. Marriages were arranged, gifts were exchanged, and disputes were settled. So marriages were arranged. We have any evidence of love, this and that, you know. Same as in Europe. Females were treated like property. So in years of good rainfall, the Walbiri had enough to eat, but it was hard to find food and water in years of drought. Now, I'm going to stop there because I want to give a bit of time to Australia Day. And, I'll continue with this next week. It'll be food in the tropical north. This was food in the desert areas. The tropical north has got a lot of water. So here we go. This is now from Australia Day 2009. This was a booklet that I produced. There you are. And in it, I've got my good friend, Banjo Patterson. And I translated 2 of his poems into Italian, which I'll probably do this week in my Italian class. I'll do that, but which is on Tuesday. And yeah, because today is Thursday. So there's Sunday for Dante and then Tuesday. Same time, 11:25 to 12:30 on this. And I'll keep to this, even with my specials, which will come maybe, after this week. Been pretty busy, really. So we'll see how I go. I'll do something probably on France, because I'm not sure yet. But I'll bring my French in. I want to use all my skills on these particular lessons, presentations. The Road to Gundagai was one, and the other one is Brumby's Run. I've done this before, but I think, repetition is a good thing. Okay, here we go. The Road to Gundagai by Banjo Patterson. The mountain road goes up and down from Gundagai to Tumut town, and branching off there runs a track across the foothills grim and black, across the plains and ranges grey to Sydney city far away. It came by chance one day that I, from Tumut, rode to Gundagai, and reached about the evening tide the crossing where the roads divide. And waiting at the crossing place, I saw a maiden fair of face, with eyes of deepest violet blue and cheeks to match the rose in hue. The fairest maids Australia knows are bred among the mountain snows. We're talking about Canberra area here. Interesting. Her voice might well a man bewitch, its tones so supple, deep and rich. The tracks are clear, she made reply, and this goes down to Sydney town, and that one goes to Gundagai. So she answers him, yeah, it can go either way. Then slowly looking coyly black, she went along the Sydney track. So you got an idea. And I, for one, was well content to go the road the lady went. Opportunity. But round the turn a swain she met. Oh my God. The kiss she gave him haunts me yet. I turned and travelled with a sigh the lonely road to Gundagai. He missed out. That's a good one. I love that poem. It's really beautiful. This one here too is beautiful. It's called Brumby's Run. You know Brumbies, don't you? You know what Brumbies are? They're horses. Wild horses. So the Aboriginal term for a wild horse is Brumby. Comes from the Indigenous people's language. At a recent trial in Sydney, a Supreme Court judge, hearing of Brumby horses, asked, "Who is Brumby and where is his run?" "It lies beyond the western pines towards the sinking sun, and not a survey mark defines the bounds of Brumby's run. On odds and ends of mountain land, on tracks of range and rock, where no one else can make a stand, old Brumby rears his stock. A wild, unhandled lot they are, of every shape and breed. They venture out beneath the moon and star along the flats to feed. But when the dawn makes pink the sky and steals along the plain, the Brumby horses turn and fly towards the hills again. The traveller by the mountain track may hear their footbeats pass and catch a glimpse of brown and black dim shadows on the grass. The eager stock horse pricks his ears and lifts his head on high in wild excitement when he hears the Brumby mob go by. Old Brumby asks no price or fee over all his wide domains. The man who yields his stock is free to keep them from his pains. So off to scour the mountainside with eager eyes aglow, to strongholds where the wild mobs hide, the gully rakers go. Is that it? Yeah, that's it. Different finish. Well, so off to scour the mountainside with eager eyes aglow, to strongholds where the wild mobs hide, the gully rakers go. So that's where you go to get the Brumby horses. And of course, if you catch them, they're yours. Now, I read the men from Snowy River, and they are the people who catch these wild horses and use them on those mountains of Australia in the east. So that's it. That's what I have for Australia, because now it's my time to bring Italy into play here, and I do it through songs, because I want people to know Italian songs, and I have very great regards for Italian singers. And there's a group called Ricchi e Poveri, and they sang this famous song called Sarà perché ti amo. I'm just going to sing them, and I might, in the middle of it, just open up and show you outside. So let me do this one, and then I'll show you. Che confusione, sarà perché ti amo, è un'emozione che cresce piano piano, stringimi forte e stammi più vicino, se ci sto bene, sarà perché ti amo. Io canto al ritmo del dolce tuo respiro, è primavera, sarà perché ti amo, cade una stella, ma dimmi dove siamo, che te ne frega, sarà perché ti amo. E vola, vola, si sa, sempre più in alto si va, e vola, vola con me, il mondo è matto perché, e se l'amore non c'è, basta una sola canzone per far confusione fuori e dentro di te, e vola, vola si va, sempre più in alto si va, e vola, vola con me, il mondo è matto perché, e se l'amore non c'è, basta una sola canzone per far confusione fuori e dentro di te. Ma dopo tutto, cosa c'è di strano? È una canzone, sarà perché ti amo. Se cade il mondo, allora ci spostiamo. Se cade il mondo, sarà perché ti amo. Stringimi forte e stammi più vicino, è così bello che non mi sembra vero, se il mondo è matto, che cosa c'è di strano? Matto per matto, almeno noi ci amiamo. E vola, vola si sa, sempre più in alto si va, e vola, vola con me, il mondo è matto perché, e se l'amore non c'è, basta una sola canzone per far confusione fuori e dentro di te, e vola, vola si va, sempre perché, sarà perché ti amo, e vola, vola con me, e stammi più vicino, e se l'amore non c'è, ma dimmi dove siamo, che confusione, sarà perché ti amo. So, that song there you put, when they sing it, the crowds and the music, my God, they really are quite a talent. And I'm happy to say that on that note, I'm going to go outside and show you where I am. There you are. Look at this. There we are. Have a good look. What do you think? Isn't it beautiful? They have this place here, you know, this is like a bed and breakfast place. It's a beautiful, it's a really beautiful place to come to. Why not? If you come to see me as well, I'll give you that booklet that I read, you know, where I read Benja Patterson's poems. There we are. outside to show you the rest of this place here, which is absolutely magnificent. Can I say, it's my son-in-law does such a good job. It's unbelievable. This is the house. The house is quite beautiful too. Oop. I've lost my hat. My gosh. There we are. I've come down. I've got to go back. It's very windy. Oh well, there's wind enough to blow my head away. So there you are. I hope you enjoyed this. And of course, those little flowers. You go to the little flowers. Look at that. See? That's the beauty of all this. How lucky we are with having our modern phones. There's some beautiful roses as well, different colours. And basically that's it. I'm going to go in now. Just 1 second. Okay, we continue. Well, how was that? That was good, wasn't it? Let me see. Okay. Close the door. Oh well, you need a lot of energy to run a farm, that's for sure. Well, I have Concetta della Santa. Welcome. I've just shown you, the beautiful place, and people can come here for a holiday. If you come and see me, you can talk to the owner, and you can make arrangements. Now, the next song is going to be Santa Lucia, because it's a classic. We've used this we've used this song here in schools because one of the famous ones from Naples, but it's in Italiano. It's a classic song. So it goes something like this. Sul mare luccica l'astro d'argento, placide l'onda, prospero il vento. Venite all'agile, barchetta mia, Santa Lucia, Santa Lucia. Con questo zeffiro così soave, com'è bello star sulla nave, su passeggeri venite via, Santa Lucia, Santa Lucia. In fra le tende bandir la cena, in una sera così serena. Chi non domanda, chi non desia, Santa Lucia, Santa Lucia. Mare sì placido, vento sì caro, scordar fa i triboli al marinaro, e va gridando con allegria, Santa Lucia, Santa Lucia. O dolce Napoli, o suol beato, ove sorridere volle il creato. Tu sei l'impero dell'armonia, Santa Lucia, Santa Lucia. Now, in that particular song there were a couple of stanzas there that I hadn't seen before. Amazing. I don't know. Now, how much time have we got? Oh, I've got a bit of time. I will do now, Finché la barca va. All right. Do you know this one? This is by Orietta Berti, another one of the Italian singers. Well worth learning the songs because they are very, very good. And welcome to Angela, Imola. Thank you very much for coming on. The next one is Finché la barca va. Il grillo disse un giorno alla formica: il pane per l'inverno tu ce l'hai, perché protesti sempre per il vino? Aspetta la vendemmia, ce l'avrai. Mi sembra di sentire mio fratello che aveva un grattacielo nel Perù, voleva arrivare fino in cielo, e il grattacielo adesso non l'ha più. Finché la barca va, lasciala andare, finché la barca va, tu non remare, finché la barca va, stai a guardare, quando l'amore viene il campanello suonerà, quando l'amore viene il campanello suonerà. E tu che vivi sempre sotto il sole, la fila di ginestre e di lilla, a tuo paese c'è chi ti vuol bene, perché sogni le donne di città. Mi sembra di vedere mia sorella, che aveva un fidanzato di Cantù, voleva verne uno anche in Cina, e il fidanzato adesso non l'ha più. Finché la barca va, lasciala andare, finché la barca va, tu non remare, finché la barca va, stai a guardare, quando l'amore viene il campanello suonerà, quando l'amore viene il campanello suonerà. Stasera mi è suonato il campanello, è strano, io l'amore ce l'ho già, vorrei aprire in fretta il mio cancello, mi fa morire la curiosità. Ma il grillo disse un giorno alla formica: il pane per l'inverno tu ce l'hai, vorrei aprire in fretta il mio cancello, ma quel cancello io non apro mai. Finché la barca va, lasciala andare, finché la barca va, tu non remare, finché la barca va, stai a guardare, quando l'amore viene il campanello suonerà. Quando l'amore viene, il campanello suonerà. Good song, great words too. But now, I haven't, this is one of the first songs that I've learned off by heart. But now, after a while, I've forgotten the words, so I'm going to read it as well. It's by Peppino Di Capri. Let's, brindiamo, champagne. It's called Champagne. Champagne per brindare a un incontro con te che già eri di un altro. Ricordi, c'era stato un invito, stasera si va tutti a casa mia. Così cominciava la festa e già ti girava la testa. Per me non contavano gli altri, seguivo con lo sguardo solo te. Se vuoi ti accompagno, se vuoi, la scusa più banale per rimanere soli io e te, e poi gettare via perché amarti come sei, la prima volta, l'ultima. Champagne per un dolce segreto, per noi un amore proibito, ormai resta solo un bicchiere ed un ricordo da gettare via. Lo so, mi guardate, lo so, mi sembra una pazzia brindare solo senza compagnia, ma io devo festeggiare la fine di un amore. Cameriere, champagne. What a beautiful song. That's Peppino Di Capri, and he's got quite a few good ones. And, well, today I've sort of finished on a good note. I've enjoyed doing it from here. I've shown you a little bit of the area. And, well, I hope next week I'll be back where I normally do it from home. So, thank you very much for all the people who've come on. I really appreciate the fact not only that you come on, but also you share my work, let people know. History is an important subject area for everybody. It's like languages. It remains with us. If you take on history, it's fantastic. And as I said, I do these things with great pleasure on Tuesdays. On Sunday, I do Dante Alighieri. We're doing Inferno, Canto 20. And this coming Sunday, I'll be at Federazione Organa on the 23rd and the 30th. And I will introduce, well, I'll talk about Dante from 3:30 p.m. to 5 o'clock. It's called Lingua e Cultura with Tom Padula. So whatever, depends on how many people come, what people are interested in, you know, there's a lot that can be done there. All the facilities are there. So I'm very happy that they've given me the okay to go ahead and do it. I'll continue with all this. As I said, if somebody comes to see me at Insegna, I'll give you those books. It's Australian, you know, what I showed you before, and it'll be a pleasure to give it to you. It's good. It's good that if you come, then you got your world history and the Italian lessons. What else can I do? I enjoy it, and this week is really special because I've gone away, and I'll be back by Friday. Tomorrow morning. Okay. All right. Ciao. Arrivederci a tutti. Thank you very much. Once again from Tom Padula, TomPadulaTV on YouTube, and Insegna Booksellers. And now it's time for me to finish off. Here we go.